The night was quiet except for the sound of footsteps echoing in the hospital hallway. The tall man in the dark suit walked with steady strides, his mind filled with numbers, projects, and deadlines. He was a man of business, a man of power, a man, people, called ruthless. Yet his heart was empty, for he carried a silence no one knew. When he entered the waiting hall, his eyes caught sight of a little girl no older than 6 or 7, sitting alone on a wooden bench clutching a worn teddy bear. She looked so fragile that even the dim hospital light seemed too heavy for her. He stopped without understanding why his days were usually too busy to notice anyone, but this child made him pause. Her eyes lifted slowly, meeting his gaze. They were large and glistening with tears that had not yet fallen, and in them he saw a loneliness that mirrored his own. He walked closer, his voice softer than he had ever known himself to speak. "Little one, why are you here all alone?" The girl tightened her hold on the teddy bear. Her lips trembled before she whispered, "I do not have a papa. Everyone else has one, but I do not. Can you be my daddy forever?" The words sliced through his guarded chest. He had built walls higher than any skyscraper, yet this little voice broke through every stone. He knelt down, his polished shoes touching the cold floor so he could look into her eyes more closely. His tone wavered. "I do not know if I deserve to be anyone's father, but if you want me to stay, I will." Her tiny hand lifted with hesitation and touched his cheek. It was small, soft, and trembling, yet it carried more weight than all his empires. Her little smile appeared like dawn after endless night. "Please do not leave me," she whispered. "I only want someone to love me." That night he did not leave. He sat beside her, listening to the way her small breath rose and fell until she finally closed her eyes and drifted into sleep. For the first time in years, his heart ached, not from emptiness, but from the sudden fear of losing this fragile soul who had trusted him with such innocent hope. The next morning he returned again. He brought her warm food instead of the cold meals she had been given. He asked about her favorite colors, her favorite stories, her favorite dreams. She told him she loved the color yellow because it looked like sunshine. She told him she dreamed of having a garden filled with flowers where she could run freely without sickness or fear. She told him she wanted someone to hold her hand every day so she would never feel forgotten. Days turned into weeks, and he found himself leaving meetings earlier than before, rushing through contracts so he could return to her side. Every laugh she gave felt like music. Every smile she showed became his reward. The hospital nurses whispered to one another about the change they saw in him. He had once been known as cold and unapproachable, yet now his eyes lit up whenever the girl ran to him with her teddy bear. One evening, she asked him again as she nestled close to his arm, "Do you promise to be my daddy forever?" He felt tears sting his eyes, a weakness he had never allowed before. "Yes, little one," he answered with a soft voice trembling with emotion. "I will be your daddy, forever." The paperwork was not easy. He had to fight through rules and procedures to adopt her, but his determination never wavered. He used his influence not for business gain, but for the right to give her a home. When the papers were finally signed, she leapt into his arms and he held her tighter than he had ever held anything in his life. She whispered, "Papa, thank you." And the sound of that single word healed every crack in his lonely heart. Life changed for both of them. She moved into his grand house, a place that had always been silent, cold, and lifeless. Suddenly it was filled with laughter and small footsteps running through the halls. She decorated the rooms with her drawings of flowers and suns and stars. She placed her teddy bear on the biggest chair and declared it the king of the house. She filled his world with colors he had never noticed before. Every morning he woke not to alarms or business calls, but to her little voice, singing in the kitchen. Every night he returned, not to emptiness but to arms that wrapped around his waist as she ran to greet him. She would climb into his lap with storybooks, asking him to read, even though sometimes he stumbled on the silly voices she demanded. He never minded because her laughter became the most valuable sound he knew. Yet fatherhood was not always easy. There were nights when she grew sick and he stayed awake holding her hand through the fever, whispering promises that she would never be alone again. There were days when she cried, missing the mother she barely remembered, and he would hold her until her tears faded into sleep. Through every struggle he discovered patience, kindness, and love that he never believed he had. Years passed gently. She grew taller, her hair longer, her laughter brighter. He watched her first steps in the garden, her first day of school, her first attempt at painting a wall with more colors than he thought possible. Each milestone carved deeper love into his heart. She was no longer just the little girl he had found on a bench. She was his daughter in every way that mattered. One summer evening, they sat together on the porch watching the sun sink into gold and crimson. She leaned her head against his arm and whispered, "Papa, do you remember when I asked you to be my daddy forever?" "Yes, little one," he answered. "I remember. It was the most important question anyone ever asked me." She smiled with the same innocence, though she was older now. "And you kept your promise." She looked up at him with shining eyes. "You gave me a home and love and everything I dreamed of." He kissed her forehead, his heart swelling with gratitude. "And you gave me life," he whispered. "You gave me the reason to live." From that moment he understood, fully, that kindness is not in grand gestures or in wealth or in power. Kindness is in the choice to stay when someone is alone, in the choice to love, when you have every reason to stay closed, in the choice to give when nothing is asked but everything is needed. He had been the loneliest CEO in the city, but now he was the happiest father in the world. Together they built memories that no wealth could buy, winter nights with hot cocoa and stories, spring mornings with laughter in the garden, summer days with long walks, and autumn afternoons with leaves piled high. They lived not in perfection but in love, and it was more than enough. And so the little girl who once begged for a papa never had to beg again, and the man who once lived in silence never knew loneliness again, for they had found each other in the cold corridors of a hospital, and through kindness, they created a bond that would last forever. As the seasons passed, the girl blossomed into her teenage years. The house that once echoed with silence was now alive with her music, her chatter, and her endless questions. She decorated her room with posters and books. She left her shoes by the staircase and forgot to close the fridge sometimes. He would walk into the kitchen after long meetings and find her trying to bake cookies, leaving flour across the counter and chocolate on her cheeks. He would smile and roll up his sleeves, helping her shape the dough, though he had never cooked before in his life. Together they burned many batches but laughed even more. Yet raising a teenager was not always simple. There were days when she grew stubborn, when she questioned rules, when she wanted freedom he was not ready to grant. He feared the world outside. He feared losing her in the same way she had once been lost and abandoned. She would argue with him at times, saying, "Papa, you do not understand. I just want to be like the other kids." And he would sit quietly watching her storm out of the room, feeling helpless. But every time she came back, she would eventually hug him, whispering, "Sorry, Papa. I did not mean to hurt you." He would stroke her hair and remind her, "You are my everything. Little one, I only worry because I love you more than life itself." One day she came home with tears in her eyes. She had experienced her first heartbreak. A boy she trusted had made her feel small and unworthy. She locked herself in her room, refusing to eat, refusing to speak. The CEO, who could control thousands of employees, who could sign contracts worth millions, suddenly felt powerless before the locked door of his daughter. He knocked gently and said, "My little one, I know it hurts, but please, let me be with you. I cannot take away your pain, but I can sit with you so you do not face it alone." At last, she opened the door. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She fell into his arms and sobbed, "Papa, why does love hurt so much?" He held her tightly, rocking her as he whispered, "Because love is real and real things can break, but you will heal. And one day you will find someone who treats you the way you deserve. Until then, I will love you enough for both." He stayed by her side through the night, reminding her she was strong, reminding her she was beautiful, reminding her she was worthy. Through these years, he also faced his own challenges. Running a company was demanding, and many times he was tempted to drown in work. Yet he made a promise to never let his office steal his time with her. He would attend her school plays, sitting in the front row, clapping louder than anyone. He would be there for her first art exhibition, proudly displaying her paintings in the company lobby for everyone to see. The employees whispered about how their boss had changed, how kindness had replaced the sharpness in his eyes, and they knew the reason was the little girl who had given him family. When she turned 16, he gave her a small golden locket. Inside was a picture of the two of them sitting in the garden on the first spring after her adoption. She gasped with joy. "Papa, it is beautiful." He smiled softly. "This locket is a promise. No matter where you go, no matter how far you travel, I will always be with you." She hugged him tightly, whispering, "You are the best papa in the world." On her 18th birthday, he arranged a surprise party with all her friends, classmates, and the hospital nurses who had once cared for her. He stood before everyone, raising his glass, and said, "I built towers and companies, but none of them gave me what this little girl gave me. She gave me love. She gave me life. She made me a father." Everyone clapped, and she rushed to hug him, tears shining in her eyes. "Papa, you are my forever." As she entered adulthood, she began to dream of her own future. She wanted to study medicine because she remembered the hospital days and the kindness of the nurses. She said, "Papa, I want to help children like I once was. Want to give them hope like you gave me." His chest swelled with pride. "You will make the best doctor, my little one. I will support you every step of the way." When the time came for her to leave for college, he felt a bitter-sweet ache. He packed her bags carefully and drove her to the campus. She held his hand tightly before stepping out. "Papa, are you sure I will be all right?" He cupped her face and kissed her forehead. "You are stronger than you know, and no matter what happens, this will always be your home," she whispered. "I love you, Papa," and walked away, carrying the locket around her neck. He stood there watching her until she vanished into the crowd, feeling both empty and full. The house was quiet again, like it once had been, but this time it was different. It was not a silence of loneliness, but a silence filled with memories. He missed her laughter. He missed her footsteps. But his heart was content, knowing she was chasing her dreams. Every weekend she called him, telling him stories about classes and friends. He listened with the same patience as he had when she was a child, never tiring of her voice. Years later, she graduated with honors. She walked across the stage in her gown, searching the crowd for him. When she saw him standing, tall, clapping with tears in his eyes, she waved proudly, holding her diploma high. Afterwards, she ran into his arms. "Papa, I did it," he whispered. "You did more than that, little one. You made me the proudest father alive." Not long after, she began working in a children's hospital, bringing smiles to young patients. She carried kindness wherever she went, always remembering how one man's choice to stay had changed her entire life. And whenever children asked her why she was always so gentle, she smiled and answered, "Because once someone chose kindness for me, and I will never forget." When she was ready to marry, she introduced her partner to him, nervously afraid he might not approve. But the CEO looked into the young man's eyes and said, "Treat her with love, respect, and loyalty, and I will trust you with my greatest treasure." Her partner promised, and he believed him. On her wedding day, she walked down the aisle, not with sadness but with joy. She held her father's arm, proudly whispering, "Papa, thank you for being my first love, my protector, my guide. You gave me everything I could have ever asked for." He smiled, his eyes glistening. "You gave me everything too, my little one. And even as you build your own family, I will always be your daddy forever." Years later, when she had children of her own, she brought them to the grand house, now filled with grandchildren's laughter. She watched as her father played with them, telling stories, baking cookies, and carrying them on his shoulders. The house, once silent, now overflowed with life, love, and joy. And in the evenings, when the children slept, she sat with her father in the garden, holding his hand. "Papa, do you remember the first night we met in the hospital?" He nodded with a smile. I remember every word. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You changed my life with your kindness, he whispered, and you changed mine forever. So the lonely CEO who once walked the world with emptiness was never lonely again, because a little girl had asked him a question that melted his heart, and together they built a life filled not with wealth but with love, kindness, and a promise that would last through generations.